You know, when we put these seminars together, sometimes we have a wish list, and sometimes we can, you know, we get that wish list and we get it filled for Christmas. Well, Christmas came a little early for us because we've got this gentleman sitting here. To say that racing's been a part of Ken Duttweiler's life would be like a gross understatement. This man for the past 45 years has done it all. Started drag racing in the late 50s, has been involved in so many different aspects of racing. And then there's this little thing called the Speed Demon. Fastest piston-powered car, 462. Is that
correct?
Okay, got my numbers right. So we're absolutely thrilled to death to have Ken here, and we're looking forward to a great session. Just to let you know too, this is not the, oh, I'm sorry, and then we've got Greg. Greg Zyla, who's only been with us for 30 years. Craig is one of our senior editors at PRI. You've seen his columns, Industry Insights, for the last 30 years. And Greg is just about the...
I'm the senior citizen.
The smartest guy. And one of the smartest guys I know, which is why I had to have him up here. So
thank you, Dan.
Sure, thank you, Greg and Ken. And again, just to let you guys know, this isn't the Dan, Greg, and Ken show. I want you guys to ask questions if there's anything. We're going to go through a few questions of ours, and then we'll let you guys fire some at Ken. So we'll have a chance to talk. Anyway, so just to get started, I wanted to ask Ken, and with so much that you've done and your history in this industry and everything, what do you most look forward to every day?
Going to work.
Yeah.
It's like a hobby shop. I mean, it's like a, you know, like the kid in the candy store mentality. You know, you have a job that's really not an 8 to 5 job. You're not working for a boss. You're not doing anything. Your bosses are your customers. Yeah. And I've been lucky to have some customers that aren't very bossy, so it makes it easy to go to work. And you know, once we get beyond that, the next thing you look forward to is it's a drag race, it's Bonneville, it's a PRI show, it's something like that, because I'm kind of dull or boring when it comes to imaginations outside my realm, so I just stick with what I like.
Mm-hmm. In terms of challenges, and I know that challenges change from year to year and decade to decade, looking at today's world, what are some of the challenges that you face as a business owner in addition to turbocharging guru? Well,
there's a couple, three of them. One of them, probably the biggest challenge is once you start one of these lengthy programs is actually finishing the darn thing. You know, due to supplier problems and just all, you know, things that the normal routine of things that we do run into. So you end up the projects always stretch out longer than you'd like, so you get a little stressed out about that. The technical side of it is challenging, but it's the most fun. And when you can endorse computers and all this other things we have to deal with in today's world, it's a pretty fun deal. And you know, probably truthfully, the one thing I enjoy most at work is just running the dyno. Yeah. Because now you're pounding away on the laptop, making something run. And you kind of go in knowing how much horsepower you're going to make, and when you don't make the horsepower, then you start doing the what ifs and find it, and then so that makes it a really interesting job. And when you can kind of multitask like I do, because I get to do about all of it, you know that you're going to have to machine the thing, assemble it, and then boy, we get to test it. And once it's done, then you get to ship it. So that's what makes it fun.
In terms of technology, I mean, you mentioned, you know, computers, and obviously that's, you know, such a huge part of everybody's business. Talk about that transition. When did it become computerized for you?
You know, for me, it was actually pretty easy. I was loosely affiliated with Buick's racing program in the mid-late 80s. And they came out with obviously the first ones to offer sequential fuel injection and no distributor. And so we kind of dabbled with making our own proms. I got a little prom burner, and then I was lucky to get the source code so we could actually figure out what all that garbage meant. And so that was kind of fun. And then John Meany started his company DFI, Digital Fuel Injection thing, and we could actually program them. So probably about 1989, we're taking the stock computers out, plugging these things in. That's probably what really started the interest in programmable electronic fuel injection, which was, without that, the turbocharged engines were okay, but they weren't that civilized, to put it that way. All of a sudden now we've got the best of everything. We've got power adder that makes a lot of power. We've got control. And I know when I was with Buick there, they wanted me to do a stock eliminator car. And I'm looking on the other side of the page where they got the Busch Grand National Series with all these so-called stage 2 race part things. And I'm thinking, wow, those guys get to play that. I have to work on a stock engine. And then one day the light bulb went off. I thought, well, no, why don't I take the stage 2 stuff and put them in our Buicks? And that started the evolution of turbochargers and then ever increasing aftermarket endorsement of the electronics. And those things turned out to be probably not the best engine ever built by a long shot. But we started off, I think, a big mile marker is Mike Thermos built me a trick nitrous package for one, and we made about 600 horsepower on a dyno, and we thought we'd just rotated the earth. And then they go forward about 30 years and making 1,900 horsepower and kind of ho-hum about the whole thing. Yeah. And through the course of that whole architecture stayed the same.
Wow.
So we just piled power on top of power on top of power until we found out that at about 2,000 horsepower, you had a candle there with about 50 passes on it, and then it was done. And then when it was done, it didn't take much visual inspection to realize that it was blown up.
Yeah.
That's a good point, because we were talking a little bit about the evolution of the turbo. Let's talk about that Buick IndyCar program that was Buick and then taken over by John Menard. You had mentioned a little bit about why those engines did fail. I mean, they were fast. I mean, if you had a Buick, you were going to qualify very well. Best they ever did was a third with Al Unser there. And I think we were talking at one time about that valve train and, you know, the evolution and how that you kind of worked on that.
Yeah, their Achilles heel was the gear drive. They had a 3-gear gear drive bolt on the front of the engine, and obviously those 120-degree firing intervals were a little harsh on the harmonics, we'll call it. So the things would try to weld the sprocket on the crank snout. They'd break the bolts off in the front of the block. They did everything ugly that you could ever want to do. And they knew they couldn't run a chain because the chain technology wasn't good enough to make that happen. So they were stuck with that Achilles heel. And and of course they had the ability to make more power probably than they should. They didn't need to make what they made. They probably could have backed off and been better off. But if you tried to spin them 9,500, 9,300, something like that, they'd go there. But they just wouldn't live there due to the valve train. And in today's world, we've got belt drives for them now that eliminate all that monkey motion. Had they had the belt drive back then, or they could have made their belt drive. They just didn't know about belt drives. And that engineering group was, you know, they didn't go out in a pool and just drag out every hardcore racer they could find. They took a group of pretty smart engineers and put those guys in there, but they probably didn't have some of the background that today you would be able to go get the right people. So, and then, like I was telling Greg, Buick really loved golf courses and cushy riding cars, and those turbocharged engines were an embarrassment to a lot of people at Buick. And one of the interesting little tales was when the '86 intercooled Buick came out, the chief engineer told the engineer in charge to quit. We're not going to build them. And he promptly informed it he'd already ordered all the parts. They had all the production run of stuff. And so the chief engineer, he had been really good at a golf course, but he wasn't really good. He probably never went to a race in his life. So the '86, '87 got built. And then the demand got so great for it that the facility in Flint that did the stampings, the body stuff, the Fisher body, they actually had an overrun of about 3 months. And they used up every single Regal component they could find to build that last Grand National. And they just didn't know how to handle the success of that because it didn't fit the mold. Yeah. It was just the wrong car for them. They've been great over at Chevrolet.
Yeah. You know, it was an embarrassment to Buick, but you go price one now or watch it go through Mecum Auto Auction, and it's not an embarrassment to the collector car guy.
No, and you know, and the interesting thing about that car is They always referred to a Buick as a doctor's car, but I had about 4 customers that were doctors, and every one of them had a minimum of 2. I mean, they just went to those things like you couldn't believe. And I just finished one for a doctor in New Jersey before we came here. And the car's got 12,000 miles on it. Runs in the high 9s at 135 or 36. And when you look at it, it's kind of weird because here's an air-conditioned, power steering, fully interiored car, idles like a street stalker. You go to the drag strip, you got all these Camaros and Mustangs and CTSV Cadillacs, stuff out there that are beating the heck out of those things. And this thing literally goes head to toe with those guys. And when they get those cars in the 9s, they're accomplishing a little bit. I mean, it's not that tough, but you kind of have to laugh about it a little bit because when we're looking back to the 1987 era car, not so much the engine package, but the car, you know. And so those things will be around forever.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
A point in time.
No kidding. So I figured, you know, we can't get too far down the road without talking about the Speed Demon. And I know that there's somebody in the audience that you wanted to
Introduce?
Yeah.
I'd like to introduce George Poteet back there. He's the guy that...
There he is.
There he is. He's the guy that made it all happen. Well, actually, George came in onto the program. The guy that really got the ball rolling was Ron Main. And Ron's probably hooked on that salt. He has probably salt fever worse than everybody you've ever met. If he could live in Bonneville on the Salt Flats, he probably would. And George come along and literally just wanted to drive the car one time. He took a ride in, and then George liked it.
Yeah.
Subsequently, George ended up owning it, and that's when it really took off because then we started doing all the little what ifs that you have. We got to play those what ifs out. You know, what if we put a V8 in it? What if we did this? You know, so it's been just a fantastic deal, and some of the stuff I think it's approximately 35 runs that George has made over 400 miles an hour.
Yeah.
Most anybody ever has made, and the thing that we've done very successfully is get the top speed of the meet at Bonneville for 6 years, and that's pretty darn good. It either means we're awfully good or we don't have a lot of competition. I'm not sure which one. We'll call it awfully good because if the competition ever showed up, we'd have to get our game together. But he allowed me to turn that thing into literally a professional operation. I mean, we show up with pretty good machine shop, welding fab equipment in the trailer, spare parts like you cannot believe, 3 engines, and the engines are motor plate to motor plate, so there is no stealing anything from the other engine. You just literally left one out, put one in.
Yeah.
And a little funny story, there was I think it was, if I remember correctly, it was ESPN or one of them sent a film crew out one time, and they had a young girl in charge of the film thing, and a couple of little anecdotes that come out of that. George and I were standing out in the middle of the Salt Flats about halfway from somewhere with a rod stuck through the side of the block. And she's there with the camera, you know, and we're laughing and joking about something. And she says, well, you don't seem too upset about it. He says, well, no, we have another engine in the trailer. So later in the week, somebody come by and he says, and this was, and we were literally probably Thursday or Friday, the end of the meet. He says, well, how do you guys know when you're done? I says, well, we've walked into the trailer and we don't have any left to play with, so I guess we're done. I mean, just empty that trailer and then you can go home.
You know what's really funny, Ken, we were talking with George, when you're done Bonneville and then you have about 3-4 months to decide what you would like to achieve next, tell us how that happens.
Yeah, well, you know, you leave with a year to date to go to the next one, and then we have to goof around, think about it. Sometimes we'll put it in a car show or do something, and then come about now, all of a sudden the reality hits that, you know, we got to get going because we only have about 8 months, and then I've been maligned a little bit for never having anything done in advance of leaving. I mean, we've literally in years past been firing the car up at 6 in the evening and loading in the trailer at 7 and going to Bonneville.
Nice.
And it's just kind of the nature of the thing, really, because, you know, what you do is you kind of look at, well, I've got 2 weeks left, so you goof off a week, and then you work a week, and then you get it done. And this year at the show, George had indicated that he's got the B, C, D, E, and F category records. And he says, but we don't have the A record, Kenny. So I stopped by the Dart dealer and was talking to those guys. So we got the stuff coming to bump into that next category, which they could make it easy for me, and they just let me take a smaller engine and go into a bigger category. But they're very sincere about it. You better be in the cubic inch range that you're in. Otherwise, we could take our 300-inch engine and go put it in there and run the 450 cubic inch category.
Yeah.
So we're going to build a really nice one. And I got to think about it a little while, because you have to kind of see what you're starting with and what you're going to finish with, and you got to know what you can finish it. You can't just start it and then have an open-ended deal there. So I finally put the puzzle together, and now we're going. We're good to go.
Great.
So, curiously, I wonder if that's considered your greatest career accomplishment. I mean, all you've done in the magazine builds and
there's probably a lot of highlights, but probably the one that has endured the longest success rate is the Bonneville.
Yeah.
And I wasn't even a Bonneville fan. I mean, I went there with the Buick guys in 1985.
Yeah.
And I just went there because they said, oh, you got to build and drive this car. So I thought, okay, I'll go to Bonneville. I wasn't excited about it. And then I think when Ron Main and George got involved, I actually got involved by dynoing a flathead engine for Ron Main. So they said, well, why don't you come to Bonneville? And this is, I don't know how many years, several years ago, but I thought, oh, okay, I'll go. And not very exciting, but I'll go. And then, then a couple, 3 years of it, and then all of a sudden it becomes a routine. Now you're really waiting to go to Bonneville.
Yeah.
And then when you get rained out for a couple of years, it's a real bummer. So,
Yeah.
But that and probably kind of like to break through into turbocharging, and especially in drag racing, because we weren't the first ones. Buddy Ingersoll obviously laid the groundwork for a lot of people, but we had a pretty good run at the Buicks and the Fords, and had a customer. We didn't have a Chevrolet penetration in the turbocharged drag racing thing at all. And this fellow was at Orlando. They have a big drag meet down there, and had some customers from New York, and they were running a car that was pretty fast. It's faster than his car. Yeah. And his had a mountain motor deal, and it was a pro mod. Well, they're not pro mod. It was at the IHR
Mountain Motor Pro
car,
stock.
Yeah. And
Great story.
They're switching engines, and they're looking over, and here's these guys from New York, and they're all eating hamburgers. And so he asked a friend of both of us, he says, well, why aren't those guys working on my car? And he says, well, it's turbocharged. He says, huh? What do you mean? Well, yeah, it's, they just got a small block with a turbo in it. And he says, really? So I got a phone call, and he says, expect to see this guy. I think he wants a turbocharged engine. This guy called up, and he says, I want 2 engines. And he comes by the shop, walks in, looks around, left the deposit, and left. And so that was our first foray into the Chevrolet stuff. And of course, then he went on to win 2 or 3 championships with the Chevys. So now we've kind of got the Buicks and the Fords and the Chevrolet. So that really is, and that's probably what led into the Bonneville thing. If you want to see the tip-in part of all of it, obviously it would be turbochargers. Yeah. And
just one thing on the Buddy Ingersoll comment. I mean, if you don't know what happened, this is back in the 80s when they were running IHRE, Mountain Motor Pro stocks, big motors, no rules, run what you brung. And they had big national events back then. Well, Buddy Ingersoll brings out this small block powered turbocharged, they didn't work on it at all, went to the final round and just lost by a hair. And that's 4 rounds. And right soon after that, you know what they did to that turbocharged car? Outlawed. Wouldn't allow any more. And that's what got you going then. And that's when you started really picking up the program.
And my deal was, I was just fortunate enough that the PR guy for Buick Racing happened to live in Ventura where I did. And he needed kind of a point man. I mean, he really didn't enjoy, even though he's a magazine guy, he didn't enjoy having to deal with people as much as I thought he would have. So he takes me around, introduces me to all the magazine people, which is probably the best thing that ever happened to an individual ever, because now all of a sudden you've got a whole bunch of editors that decide, well, I need something to do. I'll just go to him because we know him. And that's how it all works. It's an insider deal, obviously, you know. And the magazines start putting your name out. The interesting thing is, since Buicks were turbocharged, and I was working with those guys, you know, I just naturally figured turbochargers the way to go, and then that just led into that broad base of turbochargers. Now you look out there, and I mean, they can't even know they don't know how to control them now. The NHRA is their daily dilemma is how do we keep the turbocharger cars in parity with the blower and the nitrous cars, you know, and it's and you mentioned the word turbo, and it just strikes the fear in the heart of everybody. They just, we can't control it. I got kicked out of NHRA because of that.
Yeah.
They politely, not so politely, asked me to leave, and it took a couple of years to get back in, and the inability to understand it and figure how to control it has always bothered everybody. Yeah. And you kind of get that because you can buy turbo razors and turbo this and turbo that. That term is used for everything in the industry. I mean, you go into a store and you'll find something there, turbo something on the shelf, and so they really are quite the thing. And it's obviously the background of my successes.
You mentioned working with the media, and I think that's an interesting segue into how that's changed over the years. And I'm curious, are you still doing the magazine builds and that kind of thing? Or yeah, are you? Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Actually, this year's been kind of a banner year. It kind of goes up and down, but I've had 2 with race engine technology out of England, and 2 or 3 that I can think of right off the top of my head that are internet magazine stuff. Yeah. The Hot Rod magazine deal. There was some stuff we were doing here at the show, some more magazine stuff. Mm-hmm. And so it's pretty much an ongoing thing, and it kind of goes up and down. 1 year I was in Hot Rod magazine, 5 issues.
Wow.
Not because so much of me is I had content and they had people fall out of the loop and they needed to fill 3 or 4 pages, so you know, call him and see if he's got something.
For those deals, do you contact them, or do they go to you, or
they always contact me?
Do they?
Or sometimes there'll be a conversation going on a different subject, and I'll say, well, hey, you know, I got this thing that's pretty cool here. You might want to look at it. Yeah. And they'll say, oh, really? Well, let me, you know, what is it? And you know, you tell them, and they'll go run it by the editor, and the editor says, yeah, that'd make a good magazine story. Let's just follow through with it. Yeah. And so we get a fair amount of that.
So how do you promote yourself? How do you promote your business? Do you have to?
Well, number one, there's no name on the building, doors or anything, and we're not on Facebook, and we don't have a website. But I have the power of the press because I've got all that magazine stuff. Which, if you literally think about it, I'm the only guy that probably has ever had that much press in a magazine that never bought an ad. So it's kind of like, I had some really polite English lady call me right after that article on the billet V6 Buicks, or big block stuff rather. And she carried on a nice little chat, and then at the end of the thing she says, would you like to run an ad? Yeah. I said, you know, really that'd be breaking tradition. I said, I've never ran an ad ever. And she just kind of laughed and, okay, you know. Yeah. And I suspect, you know, when you have a limited production output, you don't want to be on the internet with videos of engines running on the dyno. I mean, we could inundate the media with stuff we do on the dyno because it's all cool stuff. You know, when you have an engine on there that makes 2,880 horsepower, people don't get to see that stuff a lot. Yeah, you get some eyes. So there's just a lot of cool things, but you're so into making the thing work and get rid of it that you're not into doing the video. So I know Alex Borla had his film crew come over and film a commercial basically of one of their induction systems, and so the guy said, can we put some color into the headers? Well, we certainly can. Wide open throttle at 0 degrees timing for 45 seconds, it turned everything yellow. So we still see that video. I mean, if you go on Borla's website, that's one of their premier videos. But we do stuff like that. Yeah. And once done, you kind of forget about it and just move on to something else.
But you are on YouTube. If you search YouTube for Ken, you'll find some great videos of his cars back then. And but you mentioned international. You mentioned England. How has your business increased internationally?
I have zero business in England.
Zero.
Oddly, I have a customer in Denmark that builds a supercar. I send them the engine. They mark it as their engine, which is great because I don't have any link to a customer. And then in the UAE, that's an ongoing deal. It's not sometimes big, sometimes not so big. My first customer from Abu Dhabi was a pretty well-spoken Indian guy that was running some kind of a speed shop over there, and he called and ordered an engine, and I kind of was curious, how it all come about. Well, in some of the later conversations, he'd gone on the internet, and he had a booklet of everything that had involved. He just put my name in and then just sucked everything out.
Wow.
And put it in a book. And he said, well, I didn't see anything bad about you, so I'm willing to send you some money and get you started. And I thought that was pretty cool.
That is cool. That is cool. Talk about your operation. Talk about your business. It's small business.
Yeah, it's actually very small. And there's just 3 of us.
Yeah.
And, I'm probably pretty bad at delegating authority, so if I can't do it myself, I don't want anybody else doing it.
Yeah.
Kind of bad. It's a bad mentality, but it's a good way to know when you go to work the next day you got something to do.
Yeah.
And some of the stuff we do, I'm not so sure I want to just turn anybody loose on it because, when you have some of these components, it's not out of the realm of possibilities to have $80,000 worth of parts in an engine.
Yeah.
And it's kind of terrifying to think that you could mess up one of those parts and spend a whole lot of money to replace it. So I suppose that kind of sits in the background a little bit, and then it would take the fun factor out. If I was a boss, I would be a horrible boss.
Yeah.
I don't delegate very well. I don't do any of that stuff very well. So
You're not the boss?
I don't know my wife.
The missus.
You have to answer to her all day long.
Yeah, there you go.
So.
Makes sense. So at this point, let's see if we have any questions. Does anybody want to ask? Yes, over here.
This is kind of a long question, but from the administrative part of your business to the operation of actually getting the work done in the shop, and your stress level, your creativity, how do you get all that to balance?
Well, I think if you're a little bit dumb, it works really good. You kind of have to partition it off in a day. My routine is so good that the alley cat knows it. So I come to work, get there early, fire up the computer, probably go on bang shift or something to see what the latest scuttlebutt is. Then I go get a cup of coffee. Then I come back, and now, I got to order parts. Oh God! So now we order parts, and then we get the parts ordered, and then now we got to work. And then it's just kind of like you kind of have to break it down a little bit so that a routine basically. It's just a routine, and the thought process stuff on it, I suspect that comes easier for me than some people because for some reason, and I don't know what it is, but I can kind of envision some of these interesting things that I can do and the results that I'll get from it. And then I have a good clientele of customers that just afford me that ability to do that. So, when the UPS truck shows up at FedEx, it's almost like Christmas every day. You just start unboxing all these cool parts. And when they don't show up, you're a little bit twisted. But, it's just been a lot of fun. And it'll continue to be a lot of fun as long as it sustains itself, and it will. I mean, that's a nice thing about it.
Do you have trouble prioritizing ever if you've got projects stacked up on top of one another?
There's generally several running at a time, but due to the nature of our business, you can't fill the bin on one engine in a week. So you've got stuff ordered for 4 or 5 engines, and they just kind of come in and get enough parts together, you can go ahead and build one. And But, you know, oftentimes, I mean, I've had stuff ordered for a year. You almost literally forgot why you ordered it, you know, because it's something so custom that by the time you do get it, you know, then you have to fire off and get the thing done. But there's a lot in that. If we were in more of a mass production, you know, a crate engine mentality, or a whole lot of the same thing, that would be probably financially good, but terribly boring.
Right.
So, you know, that's kind of how I'm set up, I guess, geared up.
Yes, right there.
Where do you see the direction of motorsports, turbocharging? Where do you see the direction heading in our industry?
It's kind of hard to say, you know. I think we're going to have to partition it off because for a long, long time we relied on the new cars to be kind of a part of that puzzle, you know, because obviously the most modified anything is people buy cars and then start working on them. The manufacturers have made it so darn hard to do any kind of major modifications. They're kind of shrinking that market. I think what's going to happen is people are going to have to go back to earlier configurations of stuff to do the major modifications they like to do. And I kind of believe in a few years the car you drive on the street every day is either going to be factory produced hot rod, or you're going to leave it alone. And that just kind of opens the market up for cars that aren't constricted by the lawyers and stuff. You know, and we're seeing it right now. You can put aftermarket fuel management systems on them, but you can't do it on a new car in particular because, you know, if you don't have the right key fob, it won't run. And so now I think it's going to be a backup in terms of what we're really modifying. And of course, with direct injection and smaller engines and everything has gone turbo. And a little side joke on that: when GM was building that Eaton supercharged Buick V6 at 3800, from the hierarchy down, they said, "We will never turbocharge anything." And boy, does that change, because now everything they've got, just about, except for the Corvette and the ZL1 things, but all their little 4-cylinder Econoboxes, they're all turbocharged. And so the turbocharging will be the mainstay of the industry. And Audi deviated from that a few years ago. They actually went to Eaton and had a supercharger package made for the Audis, which everybody thought was kind of unique because Audi was kind of a pioneer in turbocharged compact, or not so compact cars. So, but in today's world, it will be small engines with boost.
Yes, sir.
Uh-oh.
Here we go.
Yeah, brace yourself.
It's a little different question, Kenny. Being in this business, do you have any suggestions for actually getting a whole night's sleep?
You know, I
Your day
am.
started at 3 o'clock and you get up maybe a little bit later, but you're, oh my God, I don't have wristbands, that kind of a thing.
I mean, all the problems we solve about 2 o'clock in the morning when we wake up.
Or
Yeah.
the answers to some of the dilemmas you have come in a dream, do you ever do that?
Yeah. Oh, I know. It seems like the reoccurring ones, you know. And I generally sleep pretty well, but I'll wake up and I'll actually occasionally solve a problem.
Right.
But the hardest part is remembering what I solved when I actually wake up.
Hard to rewind it.
Yeah, rewind. Yeah.
All right, another question? Yes.
Kenny, rewinding back to your NHRA days when you got banned for the turbocharging. The question is, do you think if the NHRA technical staff was a bit more robust and had a little bit more knowledge about those turbos, that you'd be invited to be more of an advisor on their tech staff than asked to lead?
Well, you know, they actually did listen to me, kind of oddly. At one time, when they asked me to leave the stock class, I figured out that we could turbocharge these things and run one of their, it was initially a sports compact thing designed around Volkswagen, turbo Volkswagens. So we pretty much built a car to fit in that limit, and then I went to one drag race, and they weren't real happy with me, but they let me run. So then I'm speaking with the head of tech at NHRA, and so he says, well, you coming out to the division points meeting? I said, yeah, I'll be there. So I show up. They look at it, and Danny Gracia says, what's this? And I said, what do you mean? He says, well, you've got 2 turbos. I said, yeah. He says, well, you're only allowed 1. I says, well, where's it say that in the rule book? So he pulls the rule book out, and he says, goes to the category, and it says, turbocharged was the category. It says turbochargers, add an S on it, must not be liquid injected. In other words, no water injection or anything like that. So I said, so Danny, I mean, in school, they said, and you put an S on the end of it now, it's a plural. Well, he didn't understand that, so he goes and calls the head of NHRA. The guy says, well, we got to change the rule, but we can't change it now. The assumption is it's got to be 1. So about 8 months later, and some conversations with them, they decided 2 were legal. So the guy says, well, how do we police this thing? I mean, how do we keep you guys in control? I said, well, why don't we make it an American-made turbos? And at the time, a 62 millimeter turbo was about like a dump truck in size to us. I mean, we were working with these little tiny things. So I said, well, why don't you just limit it at 62 millimeters? Well, guess what they did? And guess what? About 2 years later, that turbo was so obsolete that I wished I had never put a limit on the size of it. But that's probably the only time they ever listened to me. Other than that, it was always, hey, you can't do that. So.
Is that what brought you to land speed? I mean, I know we kind of got into how you evolved into that, but was it regulations and that sort of led you to more of a wide open format, or?
Yeah, you kind of get to a point where you got to consider whether you want to run under a rules spec deal or just run an open-ended deal like some of this. Well, sometimes they're outlaw stuff. Sometimes they're a niche deal like Buick has always had a pretty good presence at Bowling Green once a year. They have the Buick show up. And if you chose to, you could just have an unlimited power application car, and they had a category for you.
Yeah.
And initially, that kind of transferred over to Pro Mod to a point, because they kind of let us run amok in Pro Mod there for a while, and then they figured out maybe they better put some constraints on it. So they've kind of got the knot tightened up a little bit on that, so it's a little more creative, but you live within the rules, obviously. And then you go to Bonneville and you say, wow, there aren't any rules. It's fuel or gasoline. If it's fuel, it could be nitrous, it could be nitro, methanol. And if it's gasoline, you buy it at the trailer there at Bonneville. So at that point, they just give you a cubic inch limitation and let you go nuts. I mean, you can. It's really an environment for creative thinking, and probably one of the last ones left.
Yeah. Do you think they've maybe over-regulated, or what does that do to innovation? I mean,
Well, over-regulation comes in stuff like an organization like NHRA, where they have to make parity.
Yeah.
Because you don't make parity, you'll have no competition. So about a month or so back, they had we'll call it a Pro Mod meet, for the lack of a better term, at Las Vegas. And in some years, the turbocharger cars had the highest count against the blower and the nitrous cars. This year, there was only about 6 turbo cars and about 9 or 10 blower cars. It just kind of runs back and forth. It depends on who wants to run.
Yeah.
And that one was a little more loose knit deal, so the guys could get a little more creative, and the speeds got really good. But then they have to go back to the real deal, which is NHRA under rules. So the organizations that have spawned off of NHRA's inability probably to provide content for a lot of those guys. Now you've got all these other organizations out there that are just running. They bring in lots of car count. And there's a lot of 8th mile. That's really popular now.
Yeah.
And you've got these outlaw Pro Mods, which are the most exciting thing in the world to watch, and they're either turbocharged or supercharged, and some nitrous cars. And so that's the area where you can kind of take advantage of some rules. I mean, some of them, they don't even have a cubic inch rule. Just run something, and they'll have a tire rule or something like that, which is kind of neat.
Yeah. So if you had a sanctioning body, what would it look like?
Pardon me?
Well, if you ran a sanctioning body, what would you, rules-wise, what would you do?
Rules-wise?
Yeah.
Leave them alone. It's a great thing to have a rule, because you'll find guys that can, a guy like John Causey out there, they can give him some rules on the engine master's thing, and he'll whip them.
Yeah.
And you can do that, or you can just kind of leave it open. And a guy that doesn't have technology, he might end up with a bigger engine, for example. So if you put an engine limit on it, some people would be competitive, but if you don't have a cubic inch limit, they can take advantage of the cubic inches to help bring back the lack of funding or technology, because that enters into it. I mean, funding is a big deal today.
Yeah.
And you go build a race car today, a top caliber race car, $250,000 is a good starting point. And then if you crash it, then you start all over again. So it's kind of nice to have loosely knit rules for some things, and then there's categories like stock classes and stuff where you have to be very specific about what you allow them to do.
Yeah.
Real quick, Ken, your love is Bonneville. You're there every year. Put us at ease and tell us that you think the salt problem that we faced, you think it's going to be okay.
It certainly is going to get better. I mean, it couldn't have gotten any worse. It was bottomed out. I mean, I think the first year I went to Bonneville was probably in the mid-'80s, and the salt then was, you had to go down 6 or 8 inches to get through the salt into the gumbo. And the last time we were there, you could go down 1/2 inch. So it just decayed, basically. So I think it's rebuilding itself a little bit, and with the help of the guys that have been mining all the salt brine, they're putting it back on the salt now.
Right, the potash companies.
Yeah. So, at that point, I can say it bottomed out, so it can only get better.
Good,
And,
good.
And we really need to get better, because what George wants to do, I can't provide him with I can provide him with the horsepower. We don't have a racetrack for it right now. So
Right.
A few years ago, we had 12 miles, what they call 12 miles of salt. I think this year we probably had about 7 of true salt condition, and the rest of it was just like painting over dirt, basically.
So talking about the next generation or the next iteration of racing professionals, do you see it? Is it all computers? Is there any desire to sort of bring it back to some of the stuff
What I see, and I kind of am amused about it, is the 2 generations.
Yeah.
And you still get the guys, I almost call them cavemen mentality, where they want to run a magneto or a carburetor or fuel injection. And then you've got these people under 30 probably or so, and they were walking around with a laptop in their hand, and I mean, they wouldn't understand what a carburetor did if you explained it to them.
Yeah.
But they know that they can plug the laptop in and go mess with it and go and run it. So I kind of thought that group, it wasn't very prominent, because when we go to some of these really structured drag races, like a Pro Mod event or something, you'll have a segment of the computerized cars, but you have a great segment of the mechanical, I call them mechanical cars, like the mechanical injection and stuff like that.
Yeah.
But I was at a meet last week, and it was primarily late model cars, and all modified to the point they could blow them up before they got home.
Yeah.
And the number of guys there that were young, it astounded me.
Yeah.
So that part of drag racing isn't as dead as I thought it was. And
It's just different, right?
it's different, and that they embrace the technology a little bit. To them, it's not technology. Maybe to somebody that doesn't know much about computers, it's technology. But these kids, they're the ones that type with both thumbs on the telephone and stuff. So it fits right in their format, and it's kind of interesting, because there are days when we can prove that a carburetor will whip any fuel injection package that you can come up with, and in terms of peak power, let's say, for example. So some of that stuff, even if it's a throwback technology, it's not all bad.
Yeah.
And NHRA proved how bad technology is in Pro Stock. Now they took their carburetors away, they took their hood scoop away, they took 70 horsepower away. I mean, it just one swift move of the pen, and they just took them back 10 years in horsepower. The only thing that come out of that was the fact that the fuel injection does run at all RPM ranges. So where they used to go in and stage at 6,000 RPMs and then mat it and leave, now they idle into the beam, mat it and leave, and they actually accelerate pretty good, so the ETs don't show the disparity in the horsepower.
Yeah.
But if you want to really make a point out of it, the carburetors still make the most horsepower.
Yeah. Talk about your customers. Our age range, you've got younger ones, you have older ones, do they tend toward a certain demographic? Are they more involved? Do they hands off, let you do your thing?
You know, the probably three distinct groups. The younger guys don't have the money to spend, so you kind of work within their means. And then you'll have guys that, in certain areas, like the guys out of the UAE, that have an unlimited backing, and they just wake up every morning with a new idea.
Yeah.
And some days you're part of that new idea, and it's just not they might ask you how much it's going to cost, but they don't remember what you tell them.
Yeah.
And then we get customers like George who know what they want, they're able to fund what they want, and they're not demanding. I won't work with anybody demanding. I mean, I probably turn down enough work to keep my shop busy because I just don't like the tone of the conversation. And if they say how much and how soon, well, how much and how soon, that's okay. But if they want to know exactly how much, we're done.
Really?
Because that person is a tire kicker. He's not real. He's window shopping. He's going to call everybody in the industry that builds whatever he's looking for and get a price quote, and then he's going to pick the one that he thinks is the cheapest. And I kind of feel sorry for the guy that he picked because he's going to be a pain. He's gonna be
so
you're just much better off with customers that know what they want, and they leave you alone. And that's the best type of business that you can be in.
Yeah, so you'll turn down business if it's...
Pardon me?
You'll turn down business if it's
Yeah.
not,
Yeah, and I've had, I bet I sent out probably 3 quotes in the last couple of months that guys sounded serious,
Yeah.
but by the time you documented, a spreadsheet and give them the actual price on it,
Yeah.
they go silent.
They get cold feet. Yeah.
But then every once in a while you get a guy like that goes silent, and then about a year later he calls up and says,
back.
I'm ready. Like it was yesterday, it's just, I'm ready, let's
Yeah.
do it. So it's, you never know, you have to kind of entertain them all,
Yeah.
and then selectively delete the ones you don't want.
Yeah. Questions? Yes, sir.
What machine work do you actually do in your shop? Engine machine work?
I have, obviously, a Sun and Hone, a Rottler boring bar, a Magnaflux machine, a line hone. I think pretty much everything you'd have with the exception of a crank grinder and a balancer.
You port heads too?
No, I used to. I had one of the very first Superflow 600s, I believe they were. And I was addicted to it. I'd grind on them, they'd be there at 10 o'clock at night, violating it. So Buick gave me a whole pile of cylinders, said, here you go, kid, make us a good cylinder head out. Man, I chopped up heads like you couldn't believe. I was the mad scientist for a while. And then I figured out, with CNC porting and stuff, and the ability to somebody to go in and develop it and then CNC it, that just made life easy. And that's probably one of the nicest things that happened in the cylinder head industry is you can just go buy a really good product. You don't have to make it yourself.
How often do you upgrade your equipment like that, your shop equipment?
How often I upgrade it?
Yeah, or you...
Oh, it kind of goes in spells, I was window shopping here on a new home, so
Yeah.
it's likely could be something I'm going to do just because, you get a little nutty about perfection on some of that stuff, and if you think that if you can find a weak link in anything you're working with, then it just eats at you till you do something about it. So, and now it seems like for years honing technology was just, run a stone through it, and clean it and ship it type of thing, and then you get off into the technology and these profilometers become more affordable, so now you're in there measuring the surface finish, and then you don't like the surface finish, and then it's just a never-ending battle, and maybe at the end of the day, it's not worth a whole lot, but if it's part of the perfect package, then you want to make sure that everything in there is part of that package. You don't want to leave something that's a little odd or off.
Do you communicate with manufacturers
A
of
lot.
equipment? Do you? Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Tell me about that.
I have a good rapport with Ford Motor Company, for example.
Yeah.
And at times with GM, and sometimes with both of them at the same time.
Yeah.
And I'm not usually contributing much of anything other than they may ship an engine and say, we'd like to see something, and right now that happens to be a Ford 2.3 liter EcoBoost, or what do they call it?
EcoBoost.
Yeah.
And they just want to, they're like everybody else, they promote, but they want to promote in magazines as much as they possibly can, because they realize that that's still one of the venues that they can't get in themselves. They can't toot their own horn, especially. So they want to pick people that'll go out and do something with a product and make it look good. And so the Ford guys seem to be really receptive to that. And there again, Ford Racing is not a very big operation. I mean, it's a pretty small group compared to GM, let's say. But that's always kind of nice. And I'm not going to change their methodology or how they do things. I'm just going to test what they do.
Yeah. I think I saw a hand in the back. Oh, sorry.
Kenny, with the engine, especially with power evolving all the time now, are there certain areas where you can look at it and it's telling you something about how long it's going to live?
Yeah, there's a lot. We call them autopsies, and there's a lot to be learned on them. You can find areas that, and right now, honestly, the area that we're beating the heck out of is pistons. And a few years ago, it was connecting rods. I mean, we buckle every connecting rod we put in the engine, and so you kind of work that end out, and it's a food chain, so you just transfer the violence into the piston, and then it'll be someplace else, I'm sure. I mean, we got the head gasket sealed. Well, that eliminated that problem. And the oiling systems, that's always been pretty good, because we've always had the capability of using things that make the oiling system good. But man, when you start making 7-8 horsepower per cubic inch, all bets are off. So you'll never take one of those engines apart ever that you can't find some stuff you'd really like to improve on. And I think, honestly, the piston is probably the weak link. The ring stuff we get today, we get really good ring packages. Now we're back on this cylinder finish stuff. We can get that technically correct. So what we do, we either bend the pins or break the pins or beat the pin bores out of the piston or pin into the rods 2/1000 bigger than what you honed it when you pull it apart. It's just, it's ongoing, and I suppose we'll fix that, and then something else is going to pop up. It's just, there's just some areas that are pretty defined, like valve train stuff, the quality roller lifters and the valve springs, the push rods. That stuff's all really good, and generally don't even look at that. I mean, if we're worried about something, it's that or one of the areas right now, and on the Bonneville car in particular, one of the biggest areas is water flow through the engine. You can build an engine, you can dyno it, you can make an obscene amount of horsepower, pat yourself on the back, it's great, and then go out there and hang it wide open for about 1 minute and 10 seconds, and you'll find out that you've got more steam in that thing than you would if it was a steam engine. And that's when you start losing head gaskets and torching heads, and then you have to figure out, it took us a while to figure out that water was our biggest issue. So now you take the fire hose mentality and try to fix it that way. The newest package I'm going to do for the streamliner next year, the cylinder head itself is dramatically better in water flow than what we've had. So some of those autopsies we had about what's going on here, we'll eliminate that right there. I'm sure I'll find some weak links someplace, but The torture test that Bonneville subjects you to is it's unfathomable what you see, because we data log extensively on that car. We have 200 channels of log data that we look at, and one of the most interesting one is you look at manifold pressure, because that's we control the wheel speed with boost, obviously. So somewhere in an area about 350 miles an hour up, if the front and rear wheel speeds match, it goes to 45 pounds of boost, and sometimes that's 22 seconds at 45 pounds of boost. And you just think, how does that happen? How can it possibly run that long? Because if we put it on the dynamometer and held it at 45 pounds of boost for 10 seconds, we'd be done for the day. And it just amazes me. I mean, I know I've been doing it forever, but I can't qualify why and how it does it. And but if there is something wrong in the package, about the 5th mile, you'll find out what that was. And if you can figure out how to fix it, then you can go back and do it again.
Ken, where do you see the technology moving, say, in the next 3 to 5 years? I don't think anybody's going to call and ask you for your new blown turbo nitrous motor you just put out, but what's going on in there? I know some guys are throwing nitrous to turbo cars and so on, and what do you see happening there?
About the only time you're going to, well, for me, when we endorsed the nitrous in the turbos, that actually works. I mean, for a long time I kind of thought, no way, but you send an engine to the Arabs and tell them that they can spool it up on nitrous to get it up on boost. To them, that was the okay to just run it on nitrous and the turbos. So after a few of those escapades, and I found out that when I got data back and I looked at it, I thought, wait a minute, the nitrous is on all the way up the hill. Oh yeah, well Kenny, it works better that way. Okay, well. So then I thought, well, there is something to that. And then you get to thinking, well, the characteristics of nitrous and a turbocharger aren't so radically different. I mean, the pressure spike with nitrous is way more aggressive and way more harmful. But if you introduce it kind of smoothly in with the fact that it's already built to take the turbocharger pressure, it has a cooling effect, and it adds some power that you wouldn't know. You'd have to maybe put a bigger turbo on to get it or something like that. So at the end of the day, that actually is kind of accepted, and now it's it's pretty wide in use in, if you have a small cubic inch engine, you're running something in a semi-competitive class where they allow you to do that, you leave the starting line on nitrous, because it'll take an engine that won't spool up on the torque converter and just bang, instant on. And then you have to make a decision. Do I leave it on for a second and a half or so to get through low gear? Or do I turn it off the minute if you want to leave it 6,500 and at 6,500 instantly, then the nitrous is off? Or do like the Arabs do and leave it on all the way down?
Yeah.
I mean,
It's happening. It's happening.
Oh yeah. And it's mixing up stuff, and then there's compounding. We've messed around with the compounding stuff a little bit, where you have a turbocharger and a blower, a root style blower, for example, and that had some applications about 6 or 7 years ago, but the turbocharger industry has actually accelerated themselves into the stuff we have today, which simply means that about all that happens there is the blower gets in the way of the turbos, because they're so darn good that you don't want to try to compound them. You want to just take advantage of the turbos. So I don't think smaller engines are on the horizon in drag racing in particular, because we're seeing a lot of 900 plus inch motors out there.
We sure are.
Yeah.
And a lot of these drag radial classes where they're kind of tire limited, those guys will run a 600 inch motor with monster turbos and run astronomically fast speeds, because there's no limits to what they can do other than the traction.
Right.
So I don't see those engines shrinking. I see the OE side shrinking big time.
Yeah.
There was a question here.
Yeah, what about using nitrous instead of an intercooler?
Yeah, there's some benefit from it.
Is that, not having the pressure drop and stuff, is that?
Yeah, you probably wouldn't want to introduce a whole lot, maybe 100 horse hit or something. And
Saving the weight too.
if you had a non-intercooled engine in particular, you will definitely see a temperature drop and a power gain, obviously. And I think if done correctly, it's not a bad venue. You'll find out when you do it wrong a couple times.
Yeah, they're on YouTube, loads of them.
I got a shelf that reminds me of my mistake.
All right. We do have time for one more question, so sure, sir.
Yes, Ken, when you build and test your long distance engines, how do you manage the heat in the dyno cell and the water supply to the dyno?
I've been really lucky in that I have a genuine Frood dyno, which when we went to the inlet and outlet water control on the dyno, the actual dyno itself doesn't require a lot of water to hold the big power numbers, which is kind of unusual, but I just have a 2,000 gallon water tank, and when we ran a Stuska dyno, that thing would beat the water up so bad you'd have water temperatures approaching boiling point, and you just simply couldn't make it work. Well, the new absorber is so efficient that the water temperatures, even on, say, a 3,000 horsepower engine, maybe never exceeds 120 degrees. And being able to control the inlet outlet part of it and having enough absorber capacity, you can literally hold just about anything without a whole lot of drama. I mean, it's not boiling the water, it's not accepting the load. It's one of the perfect venues, and we were just lucky enough to be involved in the development side of the water control strategy. So kind of went from we couldn't hold anything to all of a sudden now you can hold. I just did one the other day. It was 2,550 foot-pounds at 5,500, and it sat there and just held it. You know, so but that's all the technology, that's all electronics right there. That's where the computers really shine.
How do you manage the heat load in the dyno cell on an extended pole?
You mean like the air temperatures and stuff?
Yeah.
Bunch of fans. And you try to keep all your runs pretty short. I mean, if I were to take advantage of you know, like an endurance cycle, I would have to do some major changes in the cell because I've got one large turbine fan and a couple of rotary fans and another fan. But the heat generated off those engines, you know, it can raise the temperature level quite high, and you have a choice of bringing outside air into the engine intake, which is a better venue because now it's not subject to the heat in the cell. And I think for me, I don't do long pulls, and most of the stuff is just validation pulls that are 7, 8, 10 seconds long. And they're not consecutive pulls. Maybe you might be down for a few minutes, so it cools off. Everything goes back to normal pretty quickly.
Well, I don't want to get yelled at by show management, so I've got to end it right now. But I want to thank you all for being a wonderful audience. I appreciate it. I want to thank Ken Duttweiler, Greg Zyla. Ken, if you don't, maybe if folks have some more questions, you could stick around for a few minutes and chat with them individually. But
sure.
Thank you, everyone. Enjoy the last day of the PRI trade show. Appreciate it.
That went quick.
Ah, you did great.